Hey there. Taking a bit of break from the painting work. I've been working extremely hard over the last few days, meeting a not exactly a crisis deadline, but an emergency deadline nonetheless. So I'm relaxing a little bit, indulging myself a little bit before I get on to the next kilt, which is a Seaforth kilt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make, you saw my diatribe about bloody store-bought clothing that wears out far too quickly. Kilts don't wear out quite the same rate. So I have this spare piece of Childers tartan from several years back. It's a 5-yard length. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make what I could call a hiking kilt or a casual kilt. Historically, before 1870-ish, 18 thereabouts, military and civilian kilts were around 3.5, 4 yards. And in my regiment's history, we have accounts that a soldier would draw a new, I think they were entitled to 3 yards every 12 months. Yeah, that was the dryer. I'm just going to keep talking. They were entitled to a new issue of cloth, and I think it was 3 yards every 12 months, or 3 L's. And they could have more cloth if they chose to buy it. The tartan cloth's never been cheap. The Grenadier Company, I think, had 3.5 yards. Officers would have 3.5 or 4 yards, but officers are buying their own kit. The officers are not being supplied by the government at all. So, or perhaps even out of the regiment's funds. So, yeah, so I'm starting with 5 yards because that's the length of cloth I've got. And frankly, I think it's nice to be historically accurate, but I like a kilt that's actually comfortable and drapes right. So now this is the standard width of single width cloth. This one's nearly 29 inches. Usually they're 27 inches, 70 centimeters, thereabouts. Historically, when a soldier got his length of cloth and he would sew it up into a kilt, and if he didn't know what he was doing, he'd find somebody in the battalion or in his company that knew how to do it and would get paid in tobacco or a dram or something like that to sew it up. And they would sew these kilts up without, the only tailoring they would do would be to sew the fell. And they wouldn't be cutting out the back, they wouldn't be putting in a lining. They would be held on initially with a belt and then later with rather large pins, rather like blanket pins. But they didn't do any cutting and they didn't reduce it in height. And the reason for that was you're wearing this every day for a 12-month. So you would sew it up, you'd wear it for 3 months. So at the end of that first quarter, you would unpick the seam and you'd turn it upside down. So you got a fresh face facing out. And you'd sew it up again. And another quarter would go by. You'd unpick it. Now let's see. We've switched it. You turn it upside down. And you turn it end for end. So over 4 quarters, you would, first quarter, you'd turn it inside out. Second quarter, the top would become the bottom. Third quarter, you'd turn this inside out again. Fourth quarter, you'd flip it. So you had 4 fresh faces of cloth, as it were, to wear. And and then after 12 months, I believe you handed the cloth and you drew a new piece. And that is why they didn't reduce it in length, because you had this good selvage on each edge. But the problem is that this is 29 inches, and if I didn't reduce this in height, this would literally be right up into my armpits. And we do have photographs. I've seen photographs of the Great War, a soldier's taking his tunic off, and his kilt is literally that high. As an environmental garment, that makes sense because there's a lot of extra warmth there. But from a fashion standpoint, when you've got the tartan coming right up into your oxter, it looks a little odd to modern eyes. So the one concession I'm going to make, maybe it'll be other concessions, but the one concession I'm thinking about right now is I'm going to reduce it in height so that I have, again, the one good edge. But I'm also going to get some really heavy wear out of this kilt and see how it holds up to maybe not a year of wear, but a year of mucking about and working in the wood shop and in the garden and such like that. The second feature about this kilt, I've laid out the aprons, allowed for a rather deep apron pleat, again, just to give a little more cloth on the front so that I'm not wasting a bit of cloth. But that I decided that I was going to pleat to the stripe rather than to the sett, because if I pleat it to the stripe, I can have a maximum of 14 pleats. Also, pleating to the stripe is more slimming, it's more heightening effect versus pleating to the sett, because I laid it out and chalked it out. If I pleat this to the sett, I'm only going to have 11 pleats, so you're going to be quite wide. That of itself isn't a concern, because the number of pleats in the kilt or the length of material in a kilt by itself isn't a barometer of the quality of the kilt. But still, I pleated it either way. I took a look, and I was kind of waffling on the fence. And then I went and asked my wife, and I showed her the pictures, and she said, oh yeah, to the stripe. And I went, okay, there you go. Which reminds me, many times in the past, I've had couples come into the shop, and perhaps they haven't, most often they haven't chosen what tartan they're going to go with. So there'll be a back and forth, and then more than a couple of times, the guy will sort of attempt to put his foot down and say, I'm the one that's going to be wearing it. And the wife or the partner will say in a rather dangerously calm voice, yeah, and I'm the one that's going to be looking at it. And at this point, I can't look at them because I'm thinking, there's a right and a wrong answer here, sir. Do you have a doghouse? Because you might be sleeping in it tonight. So, but yeah, so went, consulted the wife. She said stripe, so I'm going to go with that. The other thing I've got, I've marked out my measurements. I've pulled out my two fortuitously, 1 5/8 at the hip, 1 3/8 at the waist. And I have this rather wonderful antique kilt buckle. I mean, I've got modern ones. You saw the modern ones I've had made. But this is quite wonderful because it's brass and it's lost most of its what used to be called Japan finish, which I believe is lacquer. It looks quite good. It's very attractive against the cloth. And with this, I'm going to use a brown strap, I think, rather than a black strap. I may compromise by putting a buttonhole and buckle on the left hip, but I'll cross that Rubicon when I get to it. So there we go. So yeah, it's 3 in the afternoon. I'm not going to turn this into a race, but this is my reward for being a very good boy for the last 3 days and putting in long hours. I'm going to make this, or at least I'm going to get a substantial start on this. And then once I feel sufficiently diverted and recreated, I don't know, I'll put this aside and get back to the paying work. So you know who you are waiting for your next kilt. It's about to happen just as soon as I wallow in a bit of self-gratification. And that didn't sound weird at all in my head. Until I get a bit of this done, and then I'm going to carry on. So thank you.